Okay, welcome back. We're going to do a copy of this study by Gerome, late 19th century. This is almost a profile, but notice it's not a pure profile. The head is turned slightly towards us, so we should be able to do this pretty quickly. I'm going to start with a sideways cranium. The hat is the turban is kind of throwing me off. The cranium's actually tilted down a little because look at the line of the face is tilting this way. Just a little. We can tell that he's turned towards us a little because of the ear placement. So see, the jaw is like coming way past the midpoint of the cranium. So as we construct the skull, we're going to be thinking about that. And I'm going to just indicate a kind of schematic front plane of the face like that, which we can see is generally suggested here by the light. You see how this is like an approximation of where the face is in shadow. And we've got a very vertical neck that's sort of following the same angle of the front plane of the face. So we've got a nice set of parallel lines here. Probably not an accident. Remember when we draw the shoulders, we're looking for where that line would intersect the form and about the degree of slope. So that's going to be like that. And I could ask myself, where's the top of this shoulder compared to this one? And I can see I got mine maybe a little high on this side. So I'm going to just drop that. And I'm going to go ahead and just throw in just a little faint tone along this plane just to show myself that the head is turned. And I'm going to ask myself, where's the eye in relation to the skull? And you can see it's just a little bit above center. So we're going to put the eye just a little above center, about here. And this line of the turban starts at the top of the neck back here, slopes up just above the brow ridge, and then it hooks around slightly around the forehead. If you're learning anything here, maybe you're learning just not to jump straight into the features. we're just starting to establish a big pattern of light and dark that corresponds to the motif. And remember, if you're right-handed, you're shading the other direction. The ear peaks just above eye level. And remember, all these lines are sloping down a little because they're all perpendicular to these lines. So that's the top of the ear. The bottom of the ear is level with the bottom of the nose. Bottom of the nose is halfway between the eyebrows and the chin. So what we can do is indicate the eyebrow line just above the ear line, and then go halfway down between the eyebrows and the chin, and that's going to give us the bottom of the ear, which I already hinted at because it's basically where the top of the jaw is. It's where the jaw ends. And I'm going to go ahead and block in the ear. It's kind of an unusually shaped ear. I'm just placing it. I'm not going to do the details yet. And then the last kind of construction line I'm going to put in is the facial angle. Notice the symmetry here. If we come forward from the forehead to the tip of the nose or back towards the chin, it's about the same angle going both ways. So we're just going to sketch that angle. The chin recedes a little. See, the bottom of the chin ends up being behind the forehead because this is a little longer. So that's kind of all my geometry. Okay, we're going to clean up the annotations now and get into some detail. So let's start with this outside contour. So we know where the forehead goes. Goes right up in here. And here we're seeing just a little bit of the brow ridge, the eye socket on the distal side of the forehead, of the nose, I mean. And then we're going to draw the nose pretty much in one shot. We know we need to get to the tip of the nose down here. And we can see it has this very common sort of like two curves. And then it bottoms out like that. I'm just kind of going for it with a pretty dark line because this is a fairly quick study. In order to gauge the placement of the philtrum, I'm going to do one more measurement. If I go at the angle of the face, the philtrum ends up being just a little bit ahead out past the brow ridge. So it's right about here.
What's going on, Mr. Alec?
Okay, so don't push that philtrum too far back. Keep it out in front of your brow. And let's take a look at the proportion from the bottom of the nose to the center of the mouth. There's our 1/3, 2/3 proportion. You see it? So it might be just a little bit lower than 1/3. And why is that? I would say because he has a slightly smallish chin. Would you agree with me? So that brings the mouth just a little more than 1/3 of the way down. Now, his upper lip is very full. So it's going to be useful to just look at where this, simplify this. We've got this peaking almost just a little more than halfway down. So it peaks about here. Don't make that upper lip too thin. And if I put the facial angle in again, we can see this is another really classical feature of this drawing, is the way that features all fall on this angle. And because he's turned a little bit towards us, we're seeing quite a bit of this central portion of the mouth. And then there's the outside curve of the mouth. Which comes down a little more than I just drew it. And I'm going to very faintly indicate the margin of the upper lip and the margin of the bottom lip. But notice, this is the issue that we refer to as line weight. Very faint line here and here, much heavier line in the middle. Okay, we're going to do the nostril now. I'm just drawing what I see, noticing it's about on the axis of this form is roughly horizontal, which means that it tilts down a little bit in relation to this line, which is tilted upward. But in the picture plane, it's pretty much straight. This is like a horizontal axis. I'm going to lightly indicate the back of the ala. And now's the trickiest part of the drawing, the eye placement. We already defined the line of the eye, which is down below it was this one here. And the tricky thing is going to be to get it far enough back. So how can we measure that? We could compare the back corner of the eye. We can see it's roughly even, see this line here, which we drew for the front of the neck? If we continue that up at the same angle, that's going to give us the back corner of the eye. And another thing that we could think about is how deep this space is of the eye compared to this space between the front of the eye and the bridge of the nose. Notice this space is about 50% larger than that space. So that means we want to pull this front of the eye about 2/5 of the way from here to here. That's that fractional thinking. If you don't know what 2/5 looks like, you should practice looking at fractions and learn to talk to yourself that way. And we already know roughly where the eyebrow goes. And I'm going to turn this blocked in turban into an S-curve, which is what I'm seeing here. I feel like my ear placement is all right still, so we're going to commit to the ear. A little bit of an unfamiliar structure to the ear here, but we have a very small tragus, almost invisible, and a very small antitragus. There's the start of the helix. It's got, instead of an even curve, it's got these little segments. You see that? And I'm sure that's what Gerome was seeing. Sometimes the form can sort of crumple in on itself a little, so. Notice the helix gets very, very wide and full right here in the top right corner. And there's the earlobe, and the crease of the helix comes down really far in this guy and then turns into that soft crease form right down near the earlobe. Now's the tricky part. We're going to go from the antitragus, curve up and around, and disappear behind the helix like that. This becomes the darkest portion of the ear right here. And he's also got a lot of shadow on the antihelix up here. So last time we drew a celebrity, and what we cared about was making it look like Willem Dafoe. And that's really valuable for precision of contour, because if you make it look like William Dafoe, you know that you did a good job getting likeness. with this drawing, we're more interested in the technique, 'cause we're trying to see aspects of the drawing that we might be able to use in our own portraiture. So, and we've never seen this guy before, so we're less concerned with getting a likeness and more concerned with just the feel of the drawing, and that's especially what we're going to be doing in a second when we do the final shading. So even if you're not happy with some of your proportions, or you feel like it doesn't look like the same guy, that's not our focus today, so just go with it. Don't go back and erase everything. What we do need to erase is our construction lines. And now we're gonna pull this line slightly to the right. And the turban is probably covering his hair, so we've got quite a bit of extra volume here past where the skull was. You see that? And a little less volume on top, but still some. And then the dreaded folds. They're sort of complicated, but we will simplify them. The nice thing about folds is you can place them a little wrong and it's still going to look like folds, so don't stress too much about that. We're just trying to get the effect. And then there's another cloth fold over here for this little bit that's hanging down. And we're not going to go too far down, but this row of buttons does a good job of indicating where the sternum lies. So we're going to throw that in. And I'm going to do a first shading over here. Notice this one little band of cloth is in light, so we're going to kind of shade around that. And if you don't get to the shirt, don't worry about it. So if I squint right now and look back and forth between my drawing and the original, get my eyes slightly out of focus, squint, I can see one contour that I want to correct a little, which is, I'm just going to raise the front of the eye just a little bit. I want you to do the same thing, but you might see a different correction. Just get your eyes out of focus. Some people do it by partially closing them like that. That's why we call it squinting. Other people can just sort of get their eyes out of focus at will, but just look back and forth between your drawing and the original. And that's going to be a useful trick also when we're after we've done some shading. So which we're going to do now. And we're going to follow the hatching technique pretty closely. It's beautiful contour hatching. You see that? It's like lines that all follow the form. And let me zoom in as close as I can. Maybe turn on a little more light here. Notice Gerome is not showing us a clear kind of first shading direction. This is really an engraver's shading technique. It's like every line signifies a direction that the form is moving. So it's a great thing to copy in order to get your hand in the habit of doing that, of following the form. And I think of it as a very tactile approach. It's as you're applying these shading lines, it should feel like you're sort of like touching the form, and your hand is flowing over the contours of the form. And that just gives us so much more sense of how the artist understood the form than what we would get from shading that was smudged or photorealistic. It's really interesting how the shading sort of gathers around these contours and creates a very clear dark edge without too much of a sense that there's like a strong outline here. Another thing we can learn from this drawing is the restraint in the eye. Every beginner just loves to do a bunch of detail in the eye, like, oh, that's the coolest part. Notice we have a very elegant sense here of an inverted cone for the iris. And if you've forgotten what I mean by that, you see how on the nose, the shadow's on the left, the light is on the right, because this is a solid form that's coming out towards us. The iris, the light is on the left, the shadow's on the right. That's because it's a form that's inverted. So it's like this surface is catching the light, this surface is in shadow. He hasn't even drawn the pupil. He's just given us this really beautiful sense of the light falling on the iris. So as we try to emulate that, we're going to shade down the eye socket a little, and then we're going to shade the right side of the iris a little. And leave a little bit of light showing on the left side of the iris. There's a little shadow on the white of the eye right under the lid. And there's a little darkening of the lower lid for the lash line. Look at the simplicity of that. It's just there's really no distracting details. It's all just elegant, simple form. And this is often the darkest shadow on the face right inside the corner of the eye, that deepest part of the eye socket. And a little shading on the left side of what artists apparently used to call the sausage, which is this cylindrical form above the eye. And a little shading in the bottom of the eye socket. So we're trying to emulate the feeling of Gérome's shading. We're not trying to match every single line, obviously, because that would take us all day. So just try to keep up with me and just sort of see if you can make your hand do something a little bit like what you're seeing in the original. Here's a little half tone on the top of the olive that's defining this plane change. Surprising amount of darkness right here. This is the front of the cheek. Shows how the cheek, it shows the fullness of the cheek and how it's turning away from us there. Surprising amount of dark here on the philtrum. The upper lip, curving the lines to show the curve of the lip. Along here, notice that the upper lip right at the edge is a little darker than the bottom lip, so we can emphasize that line between the lips by darkening right there. And the lower lip goes from pretty dark shadow here, and then it turns into light here, so don't darken that part. And don't pay too much attention to what I'm doing. Just try to look at the hatching that you can see on the screen and try to do it justice if you can. There's really just so much restraint in this drawing. It's like no part of it is overworked. This darkening here is the front of the sternocleidomastoidus muscle. And this overlap right here is the overlap between the throat and the sterno on the other side. Okay, it's time for finishing touches, so we're gonna back out a little. Gonna do a little bit of this basket shading on top of the head. I don't know if this is a basket, but that's the type of shading I'm seeing there. A little bit of a dark accent around some of these folds, and a little contour shading at the left hand edge of the turban. And a little very soft halftone along the back of the neck. The challenge here is not to let your halftone here compete with the actual shadow, which the left-hand edge of the nose is turning into shadow. And I could do a much better job of showing this overlap. Kind of missed an opportunity here of like really showing how this dips around behind the brow. And just like many of you, this is such a common error. I want to call your attention to it, but there's often a strong reflected light under the tip of the nose. And so we can overlook these important shadow forms, but this is in shadow right here above the Allah. And it's hardly darker than a halftone, but it's still important because it shows the way that the nose curves under there. So when you're shading right along this edge, you can press a lot harder. These are the true shadow shapes. And you can press a lot harder than on the right side where you're doing your halftones. So at this point, I'm going to squint again. I'm looking back and forth while squinting. And I'm not looking for the contours now. I'm looking for the overall arrangement of light and darks in my drawing versus the original. And that's what you want to be doing too. And we're just popping in some of the darkest darks that we might have overlooked. And you can see right now in the final stage of the drawing, this is where I'm going to put my darkest lines. The hatching technique here reminds me of another artist that we copied this year, Paul Cadmus. If you remember that one. Mm-hmm. It was the guy who was kind of like sitting down in a square-shaped guy. Yeah, he's like got his arms wrapped around his legs. Very, very similar shading technique. And you can bet that Cadmus copied some Géromes. Nobody discovers these techniques all on their own. Everybody, you copy a wide range of stuff, and then you decide which sort of flavors you like the most, which flavors of hatching appeal to you the most, and then you start employing them yourself, and they become your own in time. But that's the great advantage of copying. Because you're not going to learn anything about hatching from a photograph of a person. And when you draw Willem Dafoe with me, you're going to learn sort of how I think about hatching, but looking at this drawing, you're going to learn a completely different approach. So that's valuable. You don't want to feel stuck with one teacher. Okay, to those at home, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.